Welcome everyone to AppleINsider. It is Andrew here, and this is This Week in Apple, where I cover the best Apple news that you need to care about. Now, one thing I do want to make sure you guys know, we got chapter markers. They're down there. So if we're going through this stuff and you don't care about a story, just use that chapter marker and skip on to the next one. It is super handy. I've also got a list of all of our topics in the show notes, in the description, so you can check that out as well to jump through this episode. Now, this is actually the second time I'm talking to you guys today, if you're watching this on the day that this video came out, because this morning I had another video covering our first topic of today, the second beta of iOS 15, right? Yeah, Apple released beta 2 of iOS 15 at like 4:30 on Thursday, and I'm like, no, I was like busy with stuff, and I had my mother-in-law coming over, and I was cooking dinner. It was fish. It was delightful. Don't need to worry about it. But yeah, so I was like slammed with that, and I couldn't get a video done until this morning, so iOS 15 Beta 2 video slid out here on the channel this morning, working on this. Very soon, the next day or so, probably, I'm going to have our full in-depth comparison between AirPods Pro, maybe Powerbeats Pro, and then the new Beats Studio Buds. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned, because those actually come out today. But moving back to our main topic of today, which is that beta. And I don't want to rehash everything because I did do a video on it, but just kind of anecdotally playing around, it's definitely showed some improvements so far. I had some pretty big bugs going on in beta 1, as you would with a first developer beta that no one should be installing on their devices. But with beta 2, Apple's done some nice things. It definitely seems smoother and quicker. I'm still having bugs, like trying to go to Spotlight, sometimes my keyboard doesn't come up at all, or if I search for something, there's just no results. So there's still issues kind of going on with stuff, but Apple did finally deliver that new Maps icon that we saw at Apple's Dub keynote, like as on stage. We also got SharePlay. SharePlay is here. I've done like one test call so far, and it's just so cool how this thing works. I mean, you can share your screen, watch a video together, and I've already heard from different stuff from developers on stuff they're implementing, and it even looks like Apple is building in support for SharePlay with Test Flight, so that soon you'll be able to test, early builds of apps that are integrating SharePlay. So I'm keeping my eyes out, following developers on Twitter, seeing what kind of pops up of what I can test ahead of iOS 15 debut, and see what other cool stuff people come up with to use SharePlay for. So it's such a cool feature, and I mean, iOS 15 has been great so far. I really liked it, but yeah, beta 2 is out now. A bunch of other changes. Like I compiled a whole list of every single thing I could find comparing between devices. So go look at the iOS 15 stuff if you care about that at all. Another thing that's it's related but not related, and we're talking iPad Pros. So the new iPad Pros, they actually have up to 16 gigs of RAM if you got one of the 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte storage options. But Apple for a while has limited what developers have access to for their apps. And an app could only request up to 5 gigs of RAM. So even though the iPad Pro had 16 gigs of RAM, an app could only utilize 5 gigs of it. When you had maybe 8 or less, there was a reason for that limitation, but now with like 16 gigs, it becomes a little more questionable if it makes sense to keep that limit. But there's a reason for it that Apple has. And with iOS 15, or rather iPadOS 15, Apple is making it easier for developers to access more than that. So there's new Boolean value that developers can put into their apps that gives them the option of requesting more than 5 gigs. Basically, they're just putting in this request, and it'll kind of tell them if their app will perform better or worse. Well, I guess not really worse, but better with more access to RAM. So they're able to request more. It doesn't really specify how much more, so it's not saying that, apps can request up to 16 gigs or anything like that. They're basically just requesting if they can have more RAM for their app, and then if their app would perform better with more RAM, the system can allocate more RAM to their application. There's no guarantee that the system will be able to send that RAM over, or if your system has it, and this is really just dependent on your iPhone or your iPad, how much RAM you have on there. But this should have larger implications for the newer iPad Pros, especially that 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte options that had that 16 gigs of RAM on board. This is super interesting to me because apps like video editing and photo editing, photo editing, those can absolutely benefit from additional RAM. If you got a bunch of layers in something. So it's really interesting to see that Apple has basically put in a workaround for developers to request more access to that. I hope this isn't too boring for you guys, because I find this really curious that Apple built in so much RAM without a really good way to utilize it. So it's super interesting to me. We do have to wait for iPadOS 15 and iOS 15 to be released for this to start showing up in developer apps, but any pro level or anything that's just going to work well with a lot of RAM could start to implement this, and we could see some pretty nice performance improvements after iOS 15 and iPadOS 15 launch. So definitely keep an eye on this. It'll be really curious. Like, I'm expecting like Affinity Photo and Pixelmator Photo and LumaFusion, maybe Photoshop, a lot of those, possibly even like spreadsheets, like really large spreadsheets or power presentations that have a lot of stuff kind of cached for moving in between. I could see some improvements here when this actually gets implemented. So stay tuned this fall to see how much things actually change, and we'll see what developers have to say about this as they start testing themselves if they notice any performance improvements. So another story this week that I wanted to expand on a little bit is Epic CEO Tim Sweeney. And we have talked about the Epic versus Apple lawsuit for a while, right? Epic is suing Apple, basically saying they're being anti-competitive and that they want to be able to allow, they want Apple to allow them to run their own storefront, basically, and bypass Apple's in-app purchase options so they can collect a higher share of the revenue. They also want, outside of that, they want the ability to run like their own app store on iPhone and iPad, completely bypassing Apple, and all that kind of stuff. So there was a whole lawsuit going on. The lawsuit has since wrapped, and we're waiting judgment on that. So while we're waiting kind of the verdict, Tim Sweeney is still out there talking on Twitter. And the thing this week that I had a lot of people rub the wrong way was he said, "I really hope corporate propaganda campaigns don't become a permanent fixture of the tech industry. If a company has a problem, just fix it and bear the cost. And if it takes time to do the right thing or do right, then say so." A lot of people in the Apple space realize the hypocrisy of Tim Sweeney kind of, yelling at corporate propaganda when Epic ran a full-on propaganda campaign against Apple. I mean, when their whole plan was to initiate their own form of payment that they did through an actual in-app update versus an App Store update. So they pushed their own payment method, around Apple. And then when Apple pulled Fortnite from the App Store, they just went, full court press against Apple. They launched a whole campaign. They sent emails to all of their subscribers and players of what was going on, bemoaning Apple and blaming them completely for removing Epic or Fortnite from the App Store. They even created a parody video of Apple's 1984 campaign, their Super Bowl ad, and they just redid that in Fortnite and basically calling Apple, the giant overlords that are dictating everything. But it just seems so hypocritical that they literally run this propaganda campaign, this whole press campaign against Apple, and then complain about corporate propaganda. It just feels entirely tone deaf on the part of Tim Sweeney. So I don't know how you guys feel. I'm very curious at what you guys think. Everyone be respectful, but let me know down below what you think about the whole Epic v. Apple thing and Tim Sweeney's comments this week. I'm just very curious at what you guys think. Other minor news to talk about today. We just had Windows 11 was unveiled with a early preview coming, I believe, in June. A lot of changes coming along there. We also saw, if I jump over to my notes, because I was looking at Tim Sweeney there, Apple started cracking down on leakers, even more so. Like we saw 9 to 5 Mac talked about Apple changing their internal policies on development and kind of how their branches of code are segmented out so developers working on different features could not see what other developers were working on, and making it much more segmented so stuff couldn't leak out ahead of time. We've also seen other things that Apple's been doing to increase its security, and now it looks like Apple actually sent letters to prominent leakers, basically threatening them, linking to things that they've said and done, and that there's going to be legal repercussions if they continue stuff like that. all sorts of scariness from Apple, really trying to crack down on some of these leakers. So a couple, I believe Kang was the big one that got one of these letters. Love to Dream hasn't got one. I don't know if Prosser got any. There's been, there's a lot of leakers around in the scene. So I'm not sure who all got these letters. At least one person seems to have gotten one and shared some of its contents. And it must have worked a little bit, because he says he's not going to be sharing as much as he was in the past. So it'll be interesting to see how Apple's crackdown policies continue, if they're really going to be able to put a damper on some of these leaks. Which, speaking of which, we saw new leaked dummy units and cases for the iPhone series coming up, which kind of takes us to news. So in news, our one story. This is all that's left. One story. Kuo has a new note out talking about iPhone 13 this fall, iPhone SE next year, and the iPhone 14. So let's go ahead and break these down. Kuo says that this year Apple will have 4 new phones coming out in September. There's going to be 2 regular ones, 2 Pro ones, and each of them will have a regular size and a Plus Max size. So there's going to be an iPhone 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max, 6.1 inch, 6.7 inch, and then there's going to be an iPhone 13 and iPhone 13 Max, 6.1 inch and 6.7 inch. So no 5.4 inch phone this year. We actually had heard that production on the iPhone 12 mini ended early. They actually shut down production early on it, letting its available stock run through the iPhone 13 cycle when that begins. So it seems Apple may be done with those smaller 5.4 inch devices. Did not sell as well as Apple was hoping. So this fall we're going to get 2 6.1 inch units and 2 6.7 inch units, and no smaller device. So the Maxes are going to stay the same size, and the Pros, there were 13, and the 13 Pro will be the same size. So really interesting to see Apple kind of going that route and offering a larger size non-Pro phone when the iPhone 13 debuts. Kuo goes further on to say that Apple will be introducing a new 5G iPhone SE in early 2022, first half of 2022. That new phone will have 5G. It'll be the cheapest iPhone ever with 5G, but otherwise keeping the same form factor we have now and upgrading the processor to a new A-series processor. So kind of what we would expect, but just adding 5G to the SE. And then finally, in 2022, we'll have the iPhone 14, which Kuo says will actually finally include that under-the-display fingerprint sensor. So being able to authenticate with your thumb or something under your screen. So it could use both Face ID and in-screen Touch ID for really secure authentication in getting your phone, requiring both parts to get in, or just being able to give you an option. So if you have a mask on and not an Apple Watch, or maybe your fingers are dirty and want to use Face ID, you have options to get in that way. So that is it. That is what I have to share with you guys today on This Week in Apple. Let me know what you guys think. Please share this with your friends. We need more people to follow us. I would love to talk to more of you each and every week. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or what you want to hear me talk about next week on This Week in Apple over on Twitter at Andrew_OSU. Otherwise, I'll catch you all in the next video.